Hello there, everybody. This is Jay Frost speaking to you from the helm of How to Raise, the weekly CFRE accredited program from the Philanthropy Mastermind series, brought to you through the generous sponsorship of our friends at DonorSearch, now part of EverTrue. We don't talk much about DonorSearch, or for that matter, EverTrue, but that's not for any lack of appreciation. This is, as many of you know, the end of the 10th season of Philanthropy Mastermind's programming, underwritten by our friends over there at the company. And you can find recordings of today's session as well as all past programs at donorsearch.net under the resources tab, at least of the last 2 years of content, as well as on the DonorSearch YouTube channel. And there'll be links for that in the chat if you're here with us live today. This is, of course, a CFRE accredited program, as you know. And if you're collecting those CFRE credits, you'll find that many of those recordings from throughout the year and last year are also available to you to collect those credits. Now, today we're diving into a fascinating and fast-growing opportunity in donor engagement, and I'm going to tell you all about that and our guests. But first, I want to welcome you to participate in the discussion if, again, you're with us live. And if you're watching this recorded later, make a mental note of some of this because it's a great way for you to engage with our presenters and our content after the fact as well. But for those who are with us live, you can do a couple things today. And one, of course, is utilize the chat, which we would love you to do. So if you're here, I know our guests who are coming from across the pond. They're both in England, doing this presentation somewhat late in the day as well as late in the year and late in the season. So just, if you would, say where you are from, which part of the country or perhaps the world that you're from, or which organization you're with. Any of that information in the chat would be a wonderful way to welcome these folks to this stage today. So we'll look forward to seeing you do that. If you do have questions, though, please do utilize the Q&A. That way we will ensure that we don't miss any of your questions that may have appeared in the chat. So once again, the chat is a perfect place to play, to get to know one another, and to let the presenters today know where you're from, what your interests are, and the Q&A, a great place for those questions. One last item, which is that we do record these sessions, as I alluded to already, and place them not only on YouTube, but send an email afterwards with a link to the recording so you can share it with your colleagues who couldn't be with you live. In addition, we often include the slides. I will ask our presenters if that is something that they're willing to share as well. But be assured that you'll be receiving an email about this if you've registered with those links. And the last final note, which I'll repeat at the end today, is that we do have a little survey. So if you're, again, with us live, we'd love you to fill that out. It will take no more than 30 seconds, really. It's the shortest survey you'll ever see. And that will let you let us know how you felt about today, of course, but also, and very importantly, what you would like to see and hear in the months ahead. And it's how we're going to be doing all of our programming. It's really built around you. Please fill it out. We really do listen. Now, today is all about Bequest fundraising in the UK, or in other words, what motivates donors to leave a legacy and how those motivations shift depending on the type of organization that they support. So with the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in history on the horizon, we were talking about it just a couple days ago in an interview that's airing on Tuesday of next week. It's about $18 trillion that will go into the hands of foundations in the years ahead. Legacy giving is more important than ever. So our guest today will explore why universities can be uniquely attractive to recipients of bequests, the motivations behind supporters who choose higher education versus traditional charities, and what both sectors can learn from one another. So yes, we may get a few weird and wonderful anecdotes along the way. These folks are really, really great partners as well as presenters, and so I'm sure you'll enjoy this, but do participate, as I can see you're already doing there. So thank you, Kara, Todd, Marla, and others in the chat for saying hello. We appreciate that. So now let's meet today's presenters. We have Dr. Claire Routley, Consulting Director at Legacy Futures, where she helps organizations develop and grow their legacy fundraising programs. She holds a PhD focused on why people choose to leave gifts to charities in their wills, and she's widely recognized as one of the UK's leading experts in legacy giving. And with her is someone I had the pleasure of meeting just this summer when I was spending a few weeks at incredible Exeter College at the University of Oxford. She is the campaign director there, just launching a campaign. Do check that out on YouTube. That's Adale Bennett, where she leads the major gift and legacy fundraising strategy for, of course, as I said, one of Oxford's most storied colleges. She brings deep experience in donor motivation, campaign design, and supporter stewardship within higher education. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Claire Routley and Adale Bennett.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yes.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. And now I'm going to make sure that you can take the helm before I make myself invisible.
Marvelous. I'll just, hopefully this will all work as smoothly as it did when we checked. There we go. There we are. Brilliant. Hopefully everyone can see that.
Perfect.
Perfect. Fantastic. Okay, well, I probably can't beat Jay's glowing introductions, which were very complimentary to the both of us. So thank you for that. Claire and I have known each other for some years. Claire is arguably, as Jay's already said, the leading thinker, speaker, nerd in legacy fundraising in the UK. And I have the absolute privilege to be supervised for her for my PhD. And Claire also taught me on my very recent master's in philanthropic studies at the University of Kent. So, as Jay mentioned, alongside that, it's my old job title on this slide deck, but I am the campaign director for Exeter College and the University of Oxford, which means that the charity I work for is 711 years old. We've just launched our next big philanthropic fundraising campaign this past Saturday, which is entirely built on, very scarily, my research and around ideas of nostalgia and life review, which we're going to unpack as we kind of go through this session this evening. But that's probably me. That's a really embarrassing picture of my master's graduation. I'm in the bottom right-hand corner looking extremely awkward. But we graduated out of the most stunning Canterbury Cathedral, and it was a whole lot of fun. So I'll hand over to Claire.
So I thought if Adele was going to share an embarrassing picture, I would also share an embarrassing picture. So this is me and an alpaca going for a little walk together. I posted this on social media, and one of my friends said "date night" was the comment, which I thought was quite rude. But slightly more relevantly to what we're talking about today, I am essentially a Bequest fundraising nerd. So like Adele, that was a very kind introduction. Thank you very much, Jay. But I think often when I'm introducing myself, essentially that's how I introduce myself. I am a massive nerd who absolutely loves the topic of gifts in wills fundraising. In my day job, I'm also consultancy director at Legacy Futures, and as Jay mentioned, being the nerd that I am, I did a PhD in why people leave legacies to charities generally. And as you can see here, it was really about passing on an element of themselves, being affected by and affecting the broader sort of social situation in which they were operating. And very importantly, it was also about living on into the future. But being the nerd that I am, I'm also an eternal student. So I am currently, just for fun, because I have a very warped definition of what constitutes fun, studying for a master's in futures or in foresight at the University of Houston. Go Cougars! So I am occasionally popping over to your lovely country to join my fellow students as part of that program. So that's me.
Perfect.
So we thought, just before we get into really talking about who gives gifts in wills to charities, we thought it might be interesting for the people in the room to just hear a little bit about the context for Bequest fundraising in the UK. So we're very lucky actually in the UK in that we have really great data around who leaves gifts in wills to organisations and how much is left to organisations, partly because we have, or at least in England and Wales, that bit of the UK, we have a centralised probate system. And so I think I'm right in saying, please correct me if I'm wrong, that in the States this is done at state level, so it's quite hard to get hold of this data. But in the UK, it's much more centralised. And as part of Legacy Features, I get to work with some really brilliant analysts who also look very carefully at what's going on in the legacy market, what's going on in the economy generally, how much has been received by various organisations, and are able to do their magic and really understand what's happening. So in the UK, legacies or gifts in wills are worth £4.5 billion a year. So they actually are the single biggest source of voluntary income to the charity sector. And I think often when you're just maybe talking to the person in the street, that can be quite surprising, because I think particularly in the UK, when people think about giving to charity, they often think of collecting money in buckets outside supermarkets or running the London Marathon. And I don't think generally many people in UK society would actually realise quite how important gifts in wills are to the charities that they really care about. For example, we know that 1 in 3 guide dogs is paid for by a legacy gift. Many of the launches of our lifeboats in the UK, again, are funded by the generosity of people who are leaving gifts in wills. They're really a vital form of income to the sector. But I think the other thing is, because we have access to such good data about what's happening at the moment, we're also able to, I suppose, combine that with economic forecasts of what's likely to happen in the wider economy in the future, and therefore to get a sense of how legacy income might be growing over time. So as I mentioned, at the moment, we're about sort of 4.5 billion, somewhere in between these numbers on the graph. But really, if you look out over the next few decades, gifts in wills income to charitable organisations here is really likely to increase quite dramatically. So my fantastic colleagues estimate that by 2050, legacy income is likely to have more than doubled to £10 billion. And I think, lots of other Western countries are predicting something very similar to happen in their markets. And I know very similarly in the States that there is likely to be this really significant transfer of wealth between generations, which is likely to increase bequest giving in your neck of the woods in the same sort of direction. But as I said, I think we're very fortunate to be able to make these predictions based on the data that we are so very fortunate to have access to. So what is it that is driving this growth? And I suppose it's not rocket science really to realise that it's really driven by both a growth in the number of gifts and also potentially a growth in the value of gifts. So again, we know that in the UK, as in many Western countries, we're living in an ageing population. We know that there was a big group of people, again, common to many countries, that were born in the immediate decades following the Second World War. And that obviously it's just a demographic fact, I suppose, that those people are getting into their later years and will be passing away over the next few decades. So we know there's some of this growth is likely to be driven by the underlying demographic trends. But also we know that charitable organisations are really, I think, waking up to the potential offered by this form of giving. And so lots of charities are really investing more in the gifts in wills space. Again, we've seen quite a dramatic increase, particularly since the pandemic, actually, in the proportion of fundraising or development budgets that are now spent on gifts in wills fundraising. And it's still a relatively small proportion of the overall budget, but it is increasing quite dramatically. And then I suppose the other side of the coin is, as well as the number of gifts increasing, we also know that the value of gifts is increasing. And really, again, there are some underlying economic drivers there. So we know the value of house prices, share prices, assets generally is currently increasing for various economic reasons. And we also know that wealth, again, like in many countries, wealth is becoming more polarized. And so we are seeing a greater importance, really, of relatively large gifts in wills. And so you put all of those factors together, and really those are the key drivers, I would say, for that likely increase in legacy giving. But I think the thing that floats my boat, and I think I can speak for you and Adele on this as well, Adele, is not so much the facts and figures, although interesting and important as they are. But what really inspires me is trying to understand why people do this amazing thing. Why do people ultimately make their last act on Earth such a positive thing to do to make the world a better place?
Well, I always say I only study stuff that makes people behave in weird ways, and money and death are very much up there.
Yeah, the psychology of gifts in wills giving, I think for both of us has really sort of captured our imagination. And this is where at some point in my spiel, Adele will have to, get out that old sort of shepherd's crook and pull me off the stage, because I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours. I find it so fascinating. But in terms of why people give gifts to charities generally, which I'll talk about for a moment, and then I will hand over to Adele to talk about why people leave gifts to universities specifically. But why do people give gifts to charities generally? Why do they do this wonderfully kind and generous thing? And essentially, it's really a combination of these three groups of motivations, which I think you could summarize quite nicely as looking backwards, and then looking around oneself, and then looking forwards. So in terms of looking backwards, we know that there's a connection to giving gifts to charities or other organisations that reflect that person and their own life story. I'm sure lots of people in the room, if you've got an interest in bequest giving, you will have heard from the wonderful Professor Russell James, who talks about this very eloquently. He's done some absolutely fantastic, fascinating, especially if you're Adele and I, research where he's actually looked at what's happening in the brains of people who are thinking about a gift in the will to an organisation, to see, right at that fundamental brain level, what's happening. If you haven't heard him speak, I will not do quite as good a job as he would in describing it. But essentially, what he finds is there's a particular area of the brain, the precuneus and the lingual gyrus, that are activated when someone is thinking about a gift in a will. And it's essentially the same bit of your brain that lights up if you're in an fMRI scanner and you're looking at photos from your life. And if those photos stimulate particularly vivid memories for you, same bit of the brain is activated. So I suppose what that says is when someone is thinking about a gift in the will to an organisation, they are almost literally looking back over their lives and thinking about those connections to charitable organisations. And so in my research, it was much less scientific, really, than Professor Russell James's. It was essentially just going out and talking to supporters about why they were doing this wonderful thing. And the story that always sticks in my head, which I think kind of brings this to life, was one lovely man who said, I met my wife in a youth hostel, so I'm leaving some money to the Youth Hostel Association. And then we walked together a lot with an organisation called the Ramblers, which is very, very English. It's a group of people that like to meet from time to time, and as the name might suggest, take walks together. So leaving some money to the Ramblers. And then when I was in my 30s, my father died of cancer, so I'm leaving some money to a cancer research organisation. And then in my later years, I've gone deaf, and so I'm leaving some money to a deafness charity. And what I found particularly fascinating about that is he's leaving money to those organisations, which I suppose really sort of shaped who he was as a person, really. Organisations that represent really sort of key moments in his life story. So very different type of research to that of Professor Russell James, but actually I think we've come to quite similar conclusions there in terms of the importance and the power of life stories and life histories in in driving choice of charity there. As in that gentleman's story, though, there is often a link between a gift in the will someone might leave to an organisation and someone else who's played an important role, a loved one. In my story, it was a link to this gentleman's father who died of cancer. But interestingly, again, in our more quantitative analysis, as part of Legacy Features, we found that when someone gives gifts in their lifetime in memory of somebody that they love, they're 3 times as likely to potentially think about leaving a gift in their will. So a bit of a quick romp through looking backwards there. We also see that looking around oneself is powerful here. And I suppose that is both looking at what other people are doing or what one believes other people are doing, but then also looking at the organisation one is thinking about supporting to see if it is a good, well-run organisation that is going to spend their money effectively. So as in all forms of giving, really, we know that social norms and social influence are really important in the gifts in will space. And I suppose particularly what the research says is, yes, these influences are really powerful when someone is given in any way, shape or form. But in gifts and wills, when someone is reminded of the fact that they are mortal, they become more powerful for various weird and wonderful psychological reasons that I won't try and go into in too much depth. It becomes particularly powerful in the gifts and wills space. So again, often when you're thinking about how do we practically encourage people to think about this, often just telling little stories about other people and their plans is a really powerful way to encourage someone to think about this. And similarly, as I said, people will often also look at the charities or the organisations they're thinking about supporting to make sure that organisation is going to spend that gift effectively. And then the final bit of the puzzle really is to I think, why people do this is around looking forwards. And essentially, a gift in a will offers people this opportunity to live on beyond their own lifespan. So they know that, physically, I may no longer be here in the sort of physical form, but actually by leaving a gift in the will to an organisation that I care really deeply about, some part of me will carry on into the future. So whether that's a community that I care about, something I love, or my deeply held personal values that I share with an organisation, by leaving them a gift, I can make sure that elements of those will carry on long into the future. So really, I suppose that's a bit of a summary of why people leave gifts in their wills to charitable organisations. But I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to you, Adele, to talk more specifically about why people might leave gifts to universities. So
Perfect. So Claire's really helpfully given us the best possible introduction to my research, because if I'm really bluntly honest, my research is built on the foundation of Claire's. Everything that she did in her PhD and since has given me the pillars to go and take that kind of motivational research and apply it to very specific organisations. So my master's research was a case study of alumni legacy pledges at Exeter College, so the place where I've worked for the last 6 years. And I had the great privilege of interviewing 12, well, it was more than 12, but for the purpose of the dissertation, 12 of my lovely legacy pledges. And it was such a great spread of people. They were some of the college's absolute nearest and dearest, our biggest advocates, our greatest champions. 80% of them were also major lifetime donors. And I was really able to get under the skin of what motivated them to put a gift to the college in their will. And as I say, I've worked at Exeter a good long time. I know these people. I've known these people since the day I've joined the college. They were some of the first people I was introduced to. And it wasn't until I had those conversations and I was able to really ask them about their life story and explore that sense of journey that Claire outlined in hers. What are the organisations that influenced your life? That I really got a proper understanding of these people, why they were so involved with the college, and it completely changed my perspective on them. So that was my MA research. And then My current research is my PhD project. So I've just started the second year of my PhD, again at the University of Kent, which has the UK's leading philanthropic studies department. And my PhD project has a very fancy title, but it's essentially about exploring whether questions around social justice, so things like social mobility, access to education, all of those things, influence alumni who leave gifts in their wills to higher education institutions in the UK. Do those sorts of social injustices power this kind of giving? And the way I'm undertaking that research is, again, in the semi-structured interview space. So I'm hoping to interview 30 legacy pledges and 30 legacy fundraisers. Because what I really want to get into the meat of is where there's a tension between what a legacy pledger wants to do with their gift and what an organisation needs to do. And what the difference in perception is, perhaps, between legacy pledgers who want to give to access and outreach programs in the UK, which help to get underrepresented groups into university. So maybe people who come from particularly low income backgrounds or minority ethnic backgrounds, and how that maybe doesn't align with what the donors expect their gift to be doing. As Claire mentioned, we also have access to phenomenal data in the UK, particularly for England and Wales. And I'm incredibly privileged, again, through the grace of having Claire as my PhD supervisor, to be able to get my hands on quite a lot of that. So some of the quant analysis I'll be doing is looking at that probate data and the picture of legacy giving across the higher education sector, because obviously I'm quite firmly rooted in the University of Oxford, and that's a very, very niche view on the UK's higher education scene. So what's my next slide, Claire? Why am I doing this? Because there is loads of really, really fascinating and fantastic research that explores why people give gifts, what motivates them, how can we encourage them to do this, how can we up the number of legacy pledges, the amount of legacy revenue that charities receive. But very, very little of it looks at specific organisations. Related to higher education in the UK, for example, there were two relevant articles, one written by Claire nearly 20 years ago, and one that actually was written in the UK but looks at Australian universities. And that doesn't make any sense. Could I have my next slide, please?
Yeah, I was just going to chip in for a moment and just say, if anyone, I think people have probably worked it out, but when we talk about legacy pledges, I guess to turn it into American, I guess I think you often talk about like legacy society members, Bequest society members or something like that. So very similar.
Sorry. So the reason I want to look at why people give to higher education institutions, leave gifts in their wills to higher education institutions, is because nobody is. And that's bonkers, because legacy income accounts for about 25% of all philanthropic income for UK universities each year. It's a huge proportion. And that legacy income has grown by over 28% in the last 3 years. And that's using very poor data to calculate that growth, because UK institutions, UK higher education institutions, are just absolutely dreadful at reporting legacies. And that's an area where the kind of wider non-profit sector, the mainstream charities that Claire can works with and can talk about, completely have us beat. For some reason, we just really struggle to get that data into our databases in a recordable way. Not only that, but when you talk about the amount of legacy income we receive, in 23-24, UK universities received over £134 million in legacy income, which was up from 96 million in 22-23. So the growth there is absolutely phenomenal. We're actually one of the fastest growing sectors for legacy income in the UK. But there's no research in this space. There's nothing to explain why people are so passionate about giving to universities. And we need to understand that, because as Claire's already touched on, as Jay's already touched on, there's this major generational wealth transfer on the horizon. This is an amazing moment for universities to really commit to their legacy fundraising, legacy marketing, and get this right. As I've mentioned, we're one of the fastest growing areas for legacy income. And if I'm really honest with you, the UK university sector has kind of ignored legacy fundraising. How long ago do you reckon it was in the UK, Claire, that mainstream charities kind of came online for legacy fundraising? 10, 20 years ago?
I think we probably dipped in and out a little bit because I did once find a newspaper advert from the 1700s from a UK charity, but I think it sort of waxed and waned perhaps a little bit. But definitely maybe since the 90s, early 2000s, interest has grown really.
Yeah, and you see a lot more resource in mainstream charities, being dedicated to legacy fundraising. Whereas in higher education, there is very, very little. So I work for the University of Oxford. We're a collegiate university. We have 39 colleges and private halls of residence. And I can think of one college that has one full-time legacy fundraiser. The rest of us have part-time people. And the university as a whole has 1.5 people working on legacy fundraising full time. So I'm really hoping that part of my research is not just about contributing academically to the knowledge we have, but actually really powering these wonderful universities that we have in the UK to step up their game and to make the most of this moment in history so that we can do as much social good as possible. Our governments in the UK, since the early 90s, since Tony Blair came into power, have been shouting about the social power of university, particularly higher education. Universities have been called the engine room of social mobility in the UK for decades. But we haven't actually seen that come to fruition. And part of what I want to do is look at how this particular form of philanthropy can power that, can get that engine room really working so that we can begin to tackle some of those entrenched inequalities that exist in the education space in the UK. That was a bit of a tangent, sorry. So when I look at alumni, and I ask them, why are you leaving a gift in your will to your university? And the truth is that behind every gift there's a story, and every person has a story. And it's understanding those stories, what people are passionate about, perhaps the hardships in their life that help you understand why they've made that choice to leave one of these wonderful gifts. And when I did my master's research, when I did those wonderful interviews with my legacy pledges at Exeter, the overarching theme that came out was preservation. And I don't think that was something that I was expecting. It was certainly something that I hadn't found in the legacy literature to date. And it's a really interesting motivation because, Claire opened by talking about what motivates people to give a legacy to a mainstream charity. They look back, they look around, they look forward, and preservation almost sits in the middle of that. It's this lovely motivation that draws together those three very broad experiences of someone's social context and says, okay, well, how do I turn that context into a reality? And preservation has quite an interesting definition in the Oxford English Dictionary. What other dictionary would I use? So the act of preserving from decay, damage, or destruction, and the state or condition of being preserved, intactness, keeping, repair, the act of protection. And what I'm going to talk to you about over the course of the next couple of slides is the various different ways that preservation came out across those interviews and the different ways that we experienced it. So there were 4 main sub-themes. One of them looked at a person's assets, so maybe their physical estate, their financial estate. One looked at their values, their personal values. One looked at the idea of kind of space and place, and then the final one was a sense of self. So yeah, shout out to my alma mater, the University of Bristol, which was the picture for the space pillar there. So preserving assets is probably one of my favourites, actually. I thought this was going to be boring because who wants to talk about books and candlesticks, which is normally what I get left at Exeter. But actually it was fascinating. So in terms of preserving assets, property has been something that's come up multiple times for me over the course of my career, people leaving property to a higher education institution. And the picture on this screen is a astronomical observatory. And I currently have a legacy pledge from one of my lovely alumni, leaving us not one, but two in La Palma in Spain. And what he said to me when I asked him, why are you leaving us this? He said, what I care about is that it's used and it's kept in good order. That it's a fully functional observatory, preferably, which does astronomical research within its capabilities. So for him, it was very much about giving us this observatory, because then he knew it would be kept and used for its intended purpose. It wouldn't be sold off, it wouldn't become a tourist attraction. There's a lot of astrotourism in the area where his observatory is. It wouldn't just be liquidated. He really wanted it to fulfill a purpose. I mentioned candlesticks earlier. One of the other wonderful possessions that we've been left recently are a pair of solid silver candlesticks that my alumnus's parents smuggled out of Nazi Germany when they escaped during World War II and came to the UK. And they're kind of one of the very few things that they were able to bring with them from their home in Germany. And that alumnus, he married but never had children. And Exeter College is fundamentally a Christian organisation. We have a chapel. Part of our charitable objects is that we train and teach people to become members of the clergy. And when he spoke to me about leaving me these candlesticks, he said, I don't care that this is not a Jewish organisation. What I care about is that I know that you will respect and steward this, and that it will stay with the college for hundreds of years to come, and that some part of my family will live on in this place that really means something to me. And I just thought that was incredibly beautiful. The other thing that came out when I was talking about assets was maintaining unity. So that idea of intactness that came through in the dictionary definition. And this is a quote from an alumnus who's leaving us his whole estate. And he said, well, I think at the front of my mind was, I want to try and keep it together. He had grown up in a very, very poor family in the north of England. And he had come to university with a scholarship and a government grant, and he'd done very well. He'd gone on and really, I think he'd worked for multiple NGOs, and him and his wife never had children. So when they came to doing their estate planning, he identified Exeter to receive his gift. But it is the whole estate, because for him it was really important that it wasn't broken up at the end of his life. He wanted to make an impact with everything that he had accumulated. And he said to me, I don't want to give lots of charities little gifts. I want to keep everything I've achieved together and give it to somewhere that means something to me. I just thought that was really interesting as a form of preserving not only the asset, but the hard work and the life story that he had, that kind of rags to riches tale. It was a way of preserving something that he was really proud of, that he had accomplished for himself. Adding to a collection is also a really important part of the preserving assets question. One of my favourite anecdotes for this is I work for Exeter College. That, for those who don't know, is the college that Tolkien went to as an undergraduate. It's where he was inspired to create the first languages that later became integral to his Lord of the Rings stories. We also have Sir Philip Pullman, the author of, I think it's called The Golden Compass in the US, but the His Dark Materials trilogy. And we were left a book in a will from an alumnus who had bought that book at an auction. And he had bought it because it was the prize received by Tolkien for his academic achievements. And it turned out to be a book that had been published at the William Morris Kelmscott Press. William Morris is also an Exeter alumnus and one of the leading Pre-Raphaelite artists. So this story is at least 3 alumni deep. Before that came back to the college to be part of our collection, this sense of preserving something that was just inherently part of the material of the organisation. And then lastly, preserving assets was really closely linked to preserving memories. So the same individual who's leaving us the astronomical observatory, she tells me again and again that it's about having a functional observatory, it's about doing research. But what he also told me several times over the course of our interview was that his wife, who passed maybe 2 years before I interviewed him, she didn't want him to buy an observatory. Can't imagine why. And he found one and they went to view it, and he wasn't very hopeful that she was going to be very enthusiastic about the whole situation. But he told me, as I say, more than once, before Jean even got inside the gate, she turned to me and said, "This is paradise." And it was really clear that for that alumnus, making sure that place existed was also a way to make sure that that place his wife, his late wife, had really loved, had called paradise, was kept safe and was kept whole and was kept as part of an institution that he trusted to be around for centuries to come. So preserving assets was something I thought was going to be really boring, but actually turned out to be one of the more interesting areas. And I think there are so many nuances to the way people understand preserving assets that it's a really rich vein in my research. I'm really excited to see how that develops as I really dive into my PhD interviews. Let's have a look at the next one. The next sub-theme that came up time and time again, and maybe this is an Oxford thing, but I'm going to guess it's probably not, was preserving their values. So my fantastic alumni, time and time again, told me that Exeter was woke. That we, we've gone very lefty, very soft, and that's hilarious to me, because we're not a conservative institution, but we're not wildly liberal either. We're 711 years old. We belong to the University of Oxford, which is arguably the institution of institutions in the UK. And one of those fantastic alumni said to me, "Student these days, I think they're mollycoddled." And then I read about the various things, like what the student union does. And I mean, you go there and they've got free condoms and God knows what else. I mean, this wasn't our life. We were different. And it was so funny because, you know what, he's right. When he was up in the 1950s, the early 60s, it was a different world. It was a different institution. It was different students pursuing different things, different kinds of social change. And he considers his generation to be the change makers. But when he comes back and engages with the university now, that social dissonance, that values dissonance between the 60s and 2025 is almost too wide for him to be able to cross. And I found it really interesting because this particular individual, this legacy pledger, he chose to preserve his values and his gift, and he did that really clearly. But it wasn't by making a gift to support some social cause. He actually made a gift, or has made a pledge to the college, that will name our college bar when he passes. So he's leaving a 7-figure sum to restore and rename the college bar, which is fantastic. And when I really pushed him on that, and I was like, but why? Why not a scholarship? Why not a tutorial fellowship? Why not these like bread and butter things of what we are? And he was like, I just don't want to support students. I don't agree with the way they live their lives these days. I don't want to endorse it by giving them my money. So I'm going to give it to the infrastructure. I'm going to put my money into the physical material of the place that I love, because I want to make a mark on it, because it made a mark on my life. But in doing so, I can't countenance supporting the way that current students live and behave. I just thought that was such an interesting way for someone to express and preserve their values whilst supporting an institution that, at least on some level, they recognised had moved quite beyond their own kind of social perceptions. And that was a really eye-opening moment for me. What have we got next? Space and place. So I'm really lucky. I work in a 711-year-old institution. We have the most beautiful buildings. The image you can see on the screen now is our George Gilbert Scott Chapel, which was built in the mid-1850s. It's a miniaturized Saint-Chapelle. So if you've ever been to Paris and you've seen the big version, this is the little version. And lots and lots of my wonderful legacy pledges talked about a desire to preserve the space and place of Exeter College. And it came through in three different ways. So it was intellectual and symbolic and emotional. I found that really interesting. One of the people I interviewed, it was academic. I'm really interested in and I really care about historic architecture. So that's what I want my estate to do. And his wonderful pledge is actually for the chapel, because we have two stained glass windows that have clear glass in them. And he wants the gift in his will to go into putting the stained glass in where there isn't any, which I think will be a whole lot of fun to get planning permission for in this country. But it's a wonderful, wonderful gift. But the desire to preserve a space was also symbolic. This one is one of my alumni. We only started admitting women in the late 1970s, so she's in her early 50s. And she said to me, I used to go past and into the chapel a lot, although I'm an atheist and a heathen. It somehow symbolises the college and the times I had there. So for her, it wasn't about faith. It wasn't about what happened in that space. It was just what that building, what that architecture, what that beauty meant to her and how it became interwoven with her experience of being a student at Exeter. And she wanted to preserve that moment in her life through making a gift in her will. And then it's emotional. Again, this is another quote from one of my fantastic alumni. There's not all that many of them, but I got to speak to quite a few. And she came up for her interview and was just absolutely overwhelmed by the beauty of the place. And the gift in her will is again to support the space and place, the fabric, the infrastructure of Exeter College, because not only does she recognise that as the emotion she felt the first time she ever visited, but also it went on to shape her later life interests. She's an avid member of a local architecture society. Like, she's just really run with that love and that passion that she first experienced when she came up at 18 to study at Exeter. And I think that sense of preserving an emotional connection, an emotional reaction to a space is really important for what we do in higher education fundraising. And then finally, there's a sense of preserving their self. So we all know, any of us who have spent time studying major gift fundraising, that people give to people that they relate to. We quite often find that people make gifts to support people who are like them, whether that's racially like them, whether that's academically like them, whether that's a faith-based similarity. Those things are really, really important. And I found that in my research, multiple people that I interviewed said to me, I want to give so that someone like me can come to Exeter. And actually, over the last 2 days, I've been running Exeter College's Giving Day. And there was a lovely quote. We invite everyone who makes a gift to kind of leave us a quote or a story or a comment on our donor wall. And he said, 60 years on, my time at Exeter is still one of the pillars of who I am. And I really loved that, because it was closely followed by a quote from an alumna. She's a pediatric oncologist who she's just a phenomenal human being. And she responded with, I'm giving to support world-class teaching and to give others the chances that I had. And I just think that so clearly speaks, even in that off the cuff way that people are kind of bashing out probably on their phone as they're sending us a couple of £100, to how much this institution formed a sense of self. And that came through that desire to preserve a sense of self so strongly. It was probably the strongest and most emotive motivation that people expressed throughout the course of all my interviews. So that was interesting. Where are we going next, Claire?
I'm conscious, actually, I think because I got a bit overexcited at the beginning, that I think we've only got 7 minutes left. So
let's go.
I was thinking that actually we could probably pop this slide up and people can read it for themselves. But I wondered if people did have any questions at this point as well before particularly for Adale, whose amazing research you've just seen, whether anyone would like to ask anything before we get too overexcited and finish up.
And you're welcome to share as long as you'd like, but I'm not seeing any questions in there right now. But I do want to invite people to do that, and in fact, to give them a minute to potentially formulate questions. I'll just share, if I may, some of the stuff that's coming up next in the series, and then to answer any questions or just to talk with one another as you've been doing so in such a fun way. Then after people have had a chance to look at this slide for a moment, if you'll take it down, then we can just talk with the two of you. So coming up next in the Philanthropy Mastermind series, first of all, this Friday, December 5th, the PM podcast will continue with our CNN Heroes mini-series. And our guest is Tim Woodward, who's the Executive Director of Animal Rescue Corps, and again, one of the top 5 CNN Heroes of 2025. If you're following that program, which has been running for a number of years now, you may know that CNN is honoring these folks throughout the year. These are the top 5 of the honorees, and there's a chance to vote for the person and the organization that you think is especially deserving, and you can do that through December 9th, which is not coincidentally the date of our last Frontlines of Social Good program this year, where we'll be joined by Glenn Galash, CEO of the Stupski Foundation, for a conversation on spending down foundation assets and what happens when a foundation chooses to give everything away within a defined time frame, just as they have at that foundation. It's really interesting work. That's on next Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And so now I'll make sure that we don't have any questions in there right now. But if you wouldn't mind either running through the slide quickly or then taking it down as you've done, then we can, of course, let you all just, offer some additional thoughts on this. And I do want to thank you both for everything you presented, but I just love the pairing of the data with the stories. I think it really tells a great story in and of itself, just that pairing, because there's a tendency, I know, sometimes to look at only one or the other, as if this is only about people and their money and the trends, or conversely, it's just about one person's story, and it's clearly about both. So it was really wonderful to hear all this brought together in that way. And Adale, these quotes that you had from these people, the last bit, I think are particularly instructive. So really helpful. And we do see a note here in the chat from Kara saying, thank you so much. The stories have made your presentation impactful. I completely agree. Maybe I can ask a question of the two of you. Since I know you know one another well and you've been working together in these different ways, but what question would you ask of one another based on the research that you have primarily focused on?
I mean, I know we had an area that we were thinking we could discuss, Adale, when we were worrying that we wouldn't have enough content, and then we both got overexcited. But sorry, we did have some thoughts, because obviously my background is more in the sort of mainstream charity side, as everyone has realised. Adale is a little bit more from the education side. So, what do you think, perhaps, Adale, that sort of the charity sector might do better than the higher ed sector, or vice versa?
So the mainstream sector absolutely does data better than we do, which is crazy because you're working with far bigger data sets in much more complicated fashions. But just the confidence in terms of how things are recorded in a systematic way so that you can actually use that data to make meaningful decisions about your programs. I think mainstream charities are streets ahead of us in that sense.
Yeah. And I always admire the education sector, I think, because again, in the UK, Bequest fundraising has grown more out of that sort of mass marketing. And I think in the higher ed sector, I always look with envy at how good the relationship, the one-on-one relationship building is, and how great you are. I think it's really been able to incorporate gifting meals really into conversations with people.
Yeah, no, that's one of the great privileges of having very small constituencies. I only have about 6,500 alumni to work with, and I know lots of them personally. I know the names of their dogs. I've met their wives or husbands, and it's a natural part of the conversation. They expect us to discuss gifts and wills with them, but I've never done any mass marketing for Exeter, never. From a legacy perspective, the legacy marketing is drip fed into everything. It's there. There are articles about the impact of Bequest. There are, if you want to talk to someone about a bequest, phone Adele. But we've never done that big piece like mainstream charities do.
As you're discussing this, it occurs to me that, and you started by framing this whole conversation with the amount of the pie that's made up of legacy giving in the UK, which is different from the situation in the United States. And we always think about this, I think, in terms of whether or not people are aware. You just spoke to this issue of awareness, but also whether or not people have felt invited. And are they part of the community and then invited to participate? So it's one thing to know that something is possible. Clearly, in the UK, that is true. I think that's something we continue to work on here in the US. But how much do people have to feel like you've reached out to them and said, we would actually invite you to participate in this way?
And it definitely is, I think, a powerful thing, and all of our organisations should be. Absolutely, I love the way you phrase it there, Jay, inviting people to participate, because this is actually the opportunity to put a gift into your will. It's actually an amazing gift that we can give to people, to enable them to carry on their influence after the end of their own lives. One of the interesting anomalies that we see in data in the UK is actually about half the people that give to, again, generally the mainstream charity sector, there's no known relationship there. But having said that, although we might not know people in data terms, there generally is a connection. So they might have shopped in a charity shop, or someone they love has been cared for by an organisation. There is a connection somewhere. We just don't necessarily always know it in data terms. So I think a good lesson for us is just the importance of that invitation out as widely as possible. And so, it's not always necessarily people that and you already have that very deep relationship with. It's you never know really where that's, or you don't always know where that connection comes from. Which again is probably a difference with higher ed, because I'm assuming you know the vast majority of your legacy supporters.
Yeah. It's extremely unusual for us to get a gift from someone who hasn't been a student or a member of staff. So it's interesting in Oxford that around 30% of our legacy income does come from staff. But yeah, we know our people. We don't always know that they've left us a gift in their will until we receive it, which is such a shame, because we would love to thank and celebrate that during their lifetime. But it's very predictable, our audience, where those gifts are going to come from, because one of the things I like to talk about in my research is that people come up to Oxford when they're 18, and then that is a relationship that is genuinely lifelong. And it will wax and wane as they go through different stages in their life, but it's a relationship that should last 70 years. And at some point or another, they probably won't have been asked, but they'll have seen the messaging. And actually, when I interviewed my guys and I said to them, was there someone specific who asked you to put a gift in your will or discussed it with you? They all said no. which I don't want to cast aspersions, but I don't believe at all. But like for them, it was no, this is a personal decision. I might have had a conversation that included gifts and wills, but this was a decision I made myself when I was getting ready. So that's why so much of the work that we do is quite gentle but pervasive. We
Yeah.
we put it everywhere all the time.
Yeah, the invitation piece again is a really, I love that way of thinking about it. I'm going to steal that, Jay. And
Well, I know one of the difficulties with this, at least in the state side, is that it again, we've got marketing, and then we might have an invitation. But part of the reason for asking that question is a purely economic one. I know with major gifts, at least what we've said over time, I'd like to see recent data on this, is that when we ask, and we ask for a specific amount, especially in the capital campaign context, we'll get more money than if we just have a soft ask. In other words, this is something you can do. So part of the reason for asking about invitation is not just to say this is possible for you, but then also having a conversation where you show them a menu, essentially, of different ways that they can engage and help them to see that it's possible to go from what might be a more modest gift that they're already giving to something very significant that they hadn't imagined before. Not because we're magical as fundraisers, but because we kind of open a door for a different way of thinking. Is that true both in higher ed and outside of higher ed in the UK?
It's definitely true in higher education. A lot of the conversations I have with my alumni who want to leave a gift in their will and are exploring what they might be able to achieve with that gift is me saying, well, A, what do you want to do? And B, these are the possibilities and how can we marry those together? And for some of those donors, it does turn into a conversation about a blended gift. Is there a gift that you could make in your lifetime that could be fulfilled in your will? Do you want to make a gift that is significantly larger than maybe you could do right now, and it needs that combined form of giving to bring it to reality? And because in Oxford things are expensive, just to give you a sense, to permanently endow a PhD scholarship is well in excess of £1 million. That is often the way that people are able to achieve this kind of major transformational type of philanthropy that's beyond what they imagine they could do in their lifetime.
Yeah.
But I don't know about Claire's experience in the mainstream. Are you having those kind of?
Again, perhaps because of the history and growing a little bit more out of mass marketing. I mean, there is a nice study. I hope I'm remembering my statistics correctly. Please check them because I don't have them in front of me. But there is a study that says I think you're 13 times as likely to put a gift in the will if you've essentially been asked to do it. So I guess like all forms of fundraising, we have to ask people to think about this amazing way of giving.
And maybe this prompts then a final question for you both. I always ask this, which is if there's one chief takeaway from this conversation today, like one piece of advice that you'd offer to people who are watching or listening, what might that be?
I would almost go back to, I suppose, that point that sometimes people think that this can be essentially a scary thing to do or a difficult thing to talk about. It relates to these big taboo areas around death and money that sometimes we can find quite scary, can't we? But actually, just how positive this is for people, and just the ability to give someone the opportunity to make a gift that will enable them to transcend their own physical lives. I mean, that is amazing, isn't it? It's amazing that we can give people that opportunity to essentially live on after death. You're not going to get that from spending your money on, buying shoes or physical things. It is absolutely unique to our profession. So I would say to people, if you can almost make that mental switch from this is scary to talk about to actually this is a gift that I'm offering my supporters, I think that can really help us get to a good place for thinking and talking about and having conversations about gifts in wills.
And I think what I was going to say marries really closely to that, and it's kind of once you've made that shift, it's actually the best way I've ever found to have these conversations is to ask people about their life story. How did you come to be where you are today? Like, what are the places and people and organizations that had the most profound impact on who you are? Because that will lead people to make decisions that they feel really satisfied by, that enable them to have that sense of lasting impact. And yeah, it's a great opportunity to ask people to tell you their stories. I always say I get to ask questions that normally only your priest or your doctor gets to ask. So yeah.
Thank you both so much. This was great. Really appreciate it. And the slides, is this something you're willing to share as well?
I am.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah,
then,
happy to share.
if you have a PDF of those or something you can share with me, we'll make sure to get it to those who registered today. Thank you both very much, Claire, Adele. Really do appreciate this. And I want to thank those who are with us live, as well as those who are watching this recording later. If you need a link to this to share with others, just let us know. Of course, our thanks to Jack Frost, our producer, and to our sponsor, as always, DonorSearch. If you want recordings of any of these sessions, as I said earlier, you can always go to the DonorSearch website at donorsearch.net under the resources tab, where you'll find recordings, as well as on their YouTube channel. So take a look for any of that. And you can always connect with me anytime on LinkedIn or through Jay at donorsearch.net. And once again, fill out that survey. It'll take you just a few seconds. Look forward to seeing you next year on this show. Take care, everybody.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.